Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Sandra Caddy. Hello, Sandra.
Hello, Gavin.
And I'm told I can call you Sandy.
Please feel free.
Okay, so our watching audience, this is Sandy. Now, you have a little bit of background around Castlemaine Way, but from a particular place called...
Campbell's Creek.
Campbell's Creek. So we're not advertising Campbell's Soup, but Campbell's Creek.
That's it.
Okay, and next door to you was Grandma?
My grandma and pop, yes. Had cousins perhaps a mile away, four of my cousins, and my uncle lived not too far distance. My grandma was the youngest of, or one of the youngest of 11, and so there was lots of family and friends around to visit and share some time with.
Great. And you were, in your family, how many, and where were you?
Two children. I was the youngest.
You were the youngest.
Known as the baby.
The baby, okay. Well, a lot's happened over the years, but the farming community was a delight to grow up in.
Oh, it was really pleasant. I still love, traipsing through the bush, and I had a history of making cubbies and corrals, and had lots of pleasant times making daisy chains and climbing trees, and
good.
It was good memories.
So, would you have seen much life with the animals on the farm?
Well, we weren't on a farm as such, but from my family's perspective, we had many animals. Well, when I was 11, I had my first horse. My Uncle Jack had given us a donkey at some stage. I'm not quite sure why or how. We've had a goat, chickens, usually always a dog, and at least a cat, and rabbits at various times, and guinea pigs. And so, people and animals are certainly a part of my background, and the bush. They're the three, things I guess that stand out most from my childhood.
Yes. And the school that you went to, primary school?
I was at Campbell's Creek Primary School, and I was a third generation to go to that very same school.
Wow. How many students in the school?
At the time there was 70. I think now there's certainly in excess, I think, of 250.
Wow, it's actually expanded.
It's expanded.
Wow,
it's a
that's
place to be.
It is the place to go. Okay. So then you began a nursing career.
Yes. First off, I had a little bit of time in retail, and then I started my nursing career, yes.
Okay.
But as I mentioned, I didn't see it through to the end. I left part way through it.
Okay, but that was because of an experience there. You thought that theory wasn't practical enough, was that right?
Yes, I felt like I was learning all these fabulous things in theory, but they weren't being able to be put into practice on the ward.
Not enough time with the patients?
I'm not saying it was the case across the board with all hospitals at that time, but certainly it felt like there was a preponderance of concern that the mitre's corners were correct, and the people either sat in the bed or out of the bed depending on the time of day, and it wasn't always best for the patients, I didn't feel.
So making a bed wasn't as important as spending time with the patient.
And meeting their needs.
Good.
At that time.
Good. So your appreciation for life and for human beings started really early.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, sometimes if we talk about the animal menagerie that you experienced, they have more rights than the human being sometimes.
They sometimes do. I do believe in animal welfare, but not animal rights.
Yes, yes. All right, so the years are rolling by, and you've had some broad experiences in life, everything from working on ships. Tell me some of that. I
just have this great interest in pursuing jobs that are different or working with different people. So one of my jobs was I've worked as a cook on some fishing boats off of the coast of Queensland. That was a few decades back. More closer to home, in 2011 I worked as a governess on a sheep station. And I've done fruit picking, which was I really enjoyed it. people think I'm weird. I enjoyed it. We went swimming in the Murray after work, and it was lots of fun times.
So did the person who grew the fruit, did they get as much back, or did you eat a little bit of it on the way?
Oh no, I was a gun picker. Spent too much time filling those little buckets.
Okay, so you earned the dollars that you got.
Yes, I did.
Oh,
hard work, but I like physical work.
Mm-hmm. All right, and
which I might say is probably why I went back to do a nursing refresher course and injured my back. So then I changed tack and I went off to obtain my diploma of education in 2010.
Mm-hmm. So you'd be called a state enrolled nurse?
That's right, yes.
Okay. Well, with all of that experience now, it kind of leads you somewhere. What became very important to you, and it was all about reading a simple pamphlet.
It was. To this day, I have no idea how it came to be in my home, but I picked up a pamphlet and I read and I learned something that I didn't know. It said women who have had an abortion, it was 10 times more likely to have stillborn babies, ectopic pregnancies, become infertile. It was you're more predisposed to mental illness, and of course I've learned a lot more now. There's a definite link between abortions and breast cancer. So at that time I was looking at it, and I'm sure a lot of the people that would be listening to this would be able to recognise and say the same things I did. Oh, that wasn't just bad luck then. That wasn't just by chance or by accident. The things that have happened to friends and family were in fact a statistical probability, and a high statistical probability. Wow.
Well, Sandy, we'll talk a little bit more about that. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Sandra Caddy. Well, Sandy, we were talking about a pamphlet that came across your path about, well, a decade or so back.
Yes.
Why was that information so informative?
I had never heard it before. I had really not come across the abortion debate. I didn't see it in any media, in any outlet. It was just completely out of left field to me. I'd never heard such things. But I don't know to this day if it was actually referenced. I presume it was, because I've seen so many more that were referenced, but I didn't have to. It was referenced, if you like, by my personal experiences and what I knew from those around me. Okay.
So, again, your interest in other human beings, being able to read what's going on from their facial expressions or their life's experience, was the information, but you didn't connect the dots.
I knew the different experiences people had in relation to abortion or after abortion, but I never knew the after effects were actually could be traceable to abortion itself.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what you bumped into?
Well, certainly, I mean, without wanting to give too much away, obviously they're personal issues, but certainly a young woman I know that was had no choice about having an abortion. She was young at the time, and so she was taken to the clinic. She now has a mental illness. She has bipolar, and so different issues like this, they were there. Another woman I know, she had breast cancers, and now I know they're traceable. Here we've got an epidemic of breast cancer, and I find it very distressing that it's not made clear to the women seeking an abortion. They are denied their right to know the specific facts pertaining to them that are very, they could lead them to make a different choice, at the very least.
All right, well, let's take some things that are coming out of China. What are their statistics showing?
Well, I do know that the most recent studies coming out of China was a meta-analysis analysing many research groups. They find categorically that a woman who has had one abortion is a 44% higher risk of having breast cancer later in life. And with 2 or more, there was a 76 and 78% chance of increasing the likelihood of having breast cancer in the future. So I find it quite distressing that information needs to be out there amongst the people, particularly the young people.
So it's interesting when we look at the China statistics. Here's a country that doesn't have the ideology that we do.
That's right.
Yet it's concerned enough to research and print those facts. What's happening in Britain? What's coming out of Britain at the moment?
Some information from Dr. Roland von Marburg. He quoted that the actuaries, that is those who are the risk assessors in the UK, they list abortion as the #1 precursor to breast cancer. So it's not just one odd place. It's it would seem other countries other than Australia, it's a pretty standard fact. In fact, at the World Congress of Families, I listened to Dr. Angela, I think it's Lafranche, and she would say she had never been greeted like she was at the gates here, and that they consider they don't even need any more research. It's just been proven over and over through the decades that it's a significant increased risk. Abortion significantly increases the risk of breast cancer.
Now, if people wanted to find out more information, who are some of the groups that they could contact?
They could look online and contact Life Network, Right to Life, Emily's Voice, not to be confused with Emily's List, the Babes Project. I guess closer to home, there's the Gianni Centre.
Do you think that sometimes emotion gets involved and we say, well, I don't want to particularly make contact with them because of a political alignment or whatever? What's your response to that?
I think definitely, I can tell you the truth. Decades ago, when I wasn't aware, there was an intellectual abortion debate. If I had have heard the word right to life back then, I would have switched off, because from my perspective, I saw the media as really misrepresenting them, and so it was just put out they were hypocrites, all these things. Now I know that's not the case. They're just really lovely, devoted people wanting to help women and families, and they support life because they value it.
All right, well, we might unpackage a few more words a little bit later on, but you're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Sandra Caddy. Sandra, we were just working through some experiences that you had, and particularly looking at some words. You had mentioned that a friend of yours didn't have a choice and did have an abortion, and there were some side effects to that, some outcomes to that decision. So what's this word choice? Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
I think we do need to explain choice, because it's put to us as if it's a complete argument, as if it's a complete theory that we're meant to gain something from, but really it's just a word. And when we unpack it, I believe that really just about every reasonable person out there, which I think Australians are, we can see that it's really not a choice. If we say we're choosing to end a pregnancy, well, quite clearly every pregnancy is going to terminate anyway with the birth of a baby. So what are we terminating here? What are we having a choice about? We really need to be real here. And it makes me think that the Law Reform Commission, their abortion report that went forward, they titled Chapter 7, Child Destruction. So they're not under any illusions of what we're actually choosing. We don't need to be under any illusion of what we're choosing either. There's a lot of false stories going out there. I just read last night that now the new word is voluntary miscarriage. And not only that, some abortion providers are suggesting that at 7 weeks after conception, these unborns, it's just similar tissue to what's in the uterus lining anyway. They called it a sac. But that's not true, Gavin. In actual fact, babies of this age, or certainly at 8 weeks, their fingerprints are being laid down. At 9 weeks, they can grasp things with their little fingers. They're sensitive to touch. They've got all their organs in place at 11 weeks. And if we think of them, the babies that are being aborted because they're girl babies, even their uterus is in place at 11 weeks. So we're not being told the truth out there. We're not being informed. And it's not as if it has little consequence. It has major ramifications.
Okay, I'm just going to digress a little bit here and talk about an experience that came out of my trip to Rwanda. And it was the 10 years after the genocide. And some of the stories, as I talked with survivors, were they went to churches and buildings and stadiums to find protection together. And many mothers with their children, more mothers and children than there were men, chose to fill the stadiums. And so you might have 10,000, 20,000 people in a stadium. And then the aggressors would come and over a number of days would kill, maim with hatchets and bludgeons until there was no sound of life left. So here's a stadium full of maybe 10, 20,000 women and children and some men who were just terribly, horrifically mutilated and killed. Now, let's take the MCG. What's happening here? What could we fill the MCG with?
Well, every year in Australia, it's a little bit negotiable, but if we just say on average there's 100,000 babies aborted, I think if we wanted to visualize that, if we could walk in and see 100,000 aborted babies, I don't think we would. I'm convinced the average Australian is not going to turn around, shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's choice. They would be deeply affected by this. Even if we said, okay, let's not look at 100,000, let's look at because in Victoria, we have got a law that allows a baby to be aborted, not because people might think it's because it's not going to survive outside the womb or because it's terribly damaged. We're aborting healthy, viable babies at any stage up until birth. Now, the latest figures to come out, I don't know why they're so far behind, is 2010 and 2011. And in 2010, there was the number of late-term babies aborted that were healthy outstripped the number of babies who were aborted for defects. And sometimes these defects can be very minimal. I've heard one politician say as minimal as a missing digit or a cleft palate. So we still have in 2010 191 fully formed, perfect, healthy babies aborted in Victoria. These are the late-term babies. And in 2011, there was 183 fully formed late-term babies, and I believe the latest or the oldest of these babies was at 37 weeks, a perfectly formed, healthy baby. So if we just imagined those babies, one every 2 days aborted in Victoria, the late term, in this MCG, I'm convinced the greatest majority of Australians is going to walk out of there shaken to their very core, confused as how our governments that are put there to protect the citizens could allow such barbarous acts to take place, and they are. Our babies are not afforded anaesthetic. It's not a legal requirement. If it's an animal, our babies are not afforded such rights. And well, I could go on with the women's rights that aren't there too, but I'll just leave it there.
Right, so let's come back to a thing called the Law Act. We have a cooling off period for electrical goods, purchasing a car, signing up for a telco agreement. How broad is that a 3-year cooling off act?
3-day cooling off period.
3-day, I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's very much across the board, and it's put there to safeguard people so they're not forced into making a hasty decision. There are unscrupulous service providers out there that want to make a sale. So we have wisely put in a 3-day cooling off period to protect people who are making that choice. We need to bring that back for women making this most significant choice. Sorry, Gavin, if I continue, I was going to say, the law says that women do not need to know the specific health risks of abortion. I say they do need to know the specific health risks of abortion, and they need to have that 3-day cooling off period to fully digest it and do their own research and come to that decision outside of the abortion provider's presence.
Well, I signed up to a telco agreement a few days ago. I've read through the fine print. I found out what it was that I signed up to, and I've got 3 days to go back and say, look, I'm actually not happy with this. And it was partly an emotional choice, partly the fact that I needed a certain provider to provide a service, but I'm not happy with it. You're saying that women do not have that cooling off period?
No, it's not a legal requirement for women choosing abortion. And we say choice, but really, if there aren't the things in place to help women, it's not a choice. If it's not an informed decision, is it really a choice? And I think there has been surveys that said over 87% of women who have had the abortion, if they had have had support coming from a doctor, which we have, that's another issue, that they don't have a right of conscience to object now. If they had support from a family member, they would not have chosen that option. So I think Victoria needs to put things into place to give women real choices, not the only choice as the termination of this, their child.
In 2010, there wasn't much choice for the voter out there about the abortion issue. What have you chosen to do?
No, there was the Greens, the Labor, the Liberal, the Nationals. They all, to a degree, voted for this law. So my conscience didn't allow me to vote for them. There was no one else to vote for. So I put up my hand and I stood as a candidate because my conscience didn't allow me to not vote either. And I'm standing at these elections for the Rise Up Australia Party.
Thank you, Sandy, for that. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.